Hello, fellow Americans. This is Mr. Steffler coming to you from room 111, and I'm here to read Conflict Over States' Rights. The main idea is Jackson struggled to keep southern states from breaking away from the Union over the issue of tariffs. Why it matters now. Disputes over states' rights and federal power remain important in national politics. Our terms and names: John C. Calhoun, Tariff of Abominations, Doctrine of Nullification, Webster, Hayne debate, Daniel Webster, and Secession. One American Story. In his early political career, John C. Calhoun was hailed as one of the master spirits who stamped their name upon an age in which they live. This praise indeed for someone from the backwoods of South Carolina who had little formal education before age 18. Elected to the U.S. Congress at 28, Calhoun soon became one of its leaders. He supported the need for a very strong government and became something of a hero of the nation's young people. He spoke out against sectionalism. What is necessary for the common good may apparently be opposed to the interests of particular sections. It must be submitted as the condition of our nation's greatness. John C. Calhoun, quoted in John C. Calhoun's American Portrait. But Calhoun's concern for economic and political well-being of his home state of South Carolina and the South in general later caused him to change his beliefs. He became the foremost champion of states' rights, rigid in his views and increasingly bitter. In this section, you will learn about how the strong-willed men John C. Calhoun and Jackson came into conflict over the issue of states' rights. Rising regional differences. Andrew Jackson had taken office in 1829. At this time, the country was being pulled apart by conflicts among the three main sections: the Northeast, the South, and the West. Legislators from these regions were arguing over three major economic issues: the sale of public lands, internal improvements, and tariffs. The federal government had acquired vast areas of land through conquest, treaties, and purchases. It raised money partly by selling these public lands. However, Northeasterners did not want public lands in the West to be sold at low prices. The cheap land would attract workers who were needed in the factories in the Northeast. But Westerners wanted low land prices to encourage settlement. The more people moved to the West, the more political power the section would have. The issue of internal improvements also pulled the section apart. Business leaders in the Northeast and the West backed the government spending on internal improvements, such as roads and canals. New transportation would help bring food and raw materials to the Northeast and made take manufactured goods to Western markets. Southerners opposed more federal spending on internal improvements because the government financed these projects through tariffs, which were taxes on imported goods. The South did not want any increase in tariffs. Since 1816, tariffs had risen steadily. They had become the government's main source of income. Northerners supported high tariffs because they made imported goods more expensive than American-made goods. The Northeast had also had the nation's manufacturing. Tariffs made American manufacturers sell their products at lower price than the imported goods. The South opposed raising tariffs because its economy depended on foreign trade. Southern planters sold most of their cotton to foreign buyers. They were not paid in money, but they were given credit. Then they used this credit to buy foreign goods, manufactured goods. Because of the high tariffs, these foreign goods cost more. Eventually, the tariff issue would lead to conflict between the North and South. Tariff of Abominations. In 1828, the last months of John Quincy Adams' presidency, Congress passed a law that significantly raised tariffs on the raw materials and manufactured goods. Southerners were outraged. They had to sell their cotton at low prices to be competitive, yet the tariffs forced them to pay high prices for manufactured goods. Southerners felt that the economic interests of the Northeast were determining the national policy. They hated the tariff and called it the Tariff of Abomination. An abomination is a hateful thing. Differences over the tariff helped Jackson win the election of 1828. Southerners blamed Adams for the tariff since it was passed during his administration, so they voted for him. The crisis over nullification. The Tariff of Abominations hit South Carolina especially hard because their economy was in a slump. Some leaders in the state even spoke of leaving the Union over these issues, the issue of tariffs. John C. Calhoun, then Jackson's vice president, understood the problem of South Carolina's farmers because he was one himself. But he wanted to find a way to keep South Carolina from leaving the Union. The answer he arrived at was the doctrine of nullification. A state, Calhoun said, had the right to nullify or reject a federal law that it considers unconstitutional. Calhoun was not the first person to propose the doctrine of nullification. It had been stated earlier by Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson argued that the Union was a league of sovereign, self-governing states that had the right to limit the federal government. Calhoun developed the doctrine further. He said that any state could nullify or refuse to recognize a law within its borders. He believed that the Congress had no right to impose a tariff and favored one section of the country. Therefore, South Carolina had the right to nullify the tariff. Calhoun's doctrine was an extreme form of states' rights, a theory that states have the right to judge whether a law of Congress is unconstitutional. In the summer of 1828, Calhoun wrote a document called South Carolina's Exposition and Protest. It stated this theory. Calhoun allowed the document to be published. He did not sign his name. He knew the idea would draw controversy. The states' rights debate. Calhoun was right. His ideas fueled a debate over the nature of the federal union. This debate had been going on since independence from Britain. More and more people took sides. Some supported a strong federal government. Others defended the rights of the states. This question would be a major political issue from this time until the Civil War was fought to resolve it almost 30 years later. One of the great debates in American history took place in the U.S. Senate over the doctrine of nullification, the Webster-Hayne debate in 1830. On one side was Daniel Webster, a senator from Massachusetts who was the most powerful speaker at the time. On the other was Robert Y. Hayne, a senator from South Carolina. Hayne defended nullification. He argued that it gave the states a lawful way to protest and maintain their freedom. He also said that the real enemies of the Union were those who were constantly stealing power from the states and adding it to the federal government. Webster argued that it was the people, not the states, that made the Union. In the words that were printed and spread across the country, Webster declared the freedom of the Union, freedom and union go together. When my eyes shall be turned to behold for the last time the sun in heaven, may it not be shining upon a broken and dishonored fragments of what was once a glorious union, liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable. Jackson had not made his position on the states' rights issue, even though Calhoun was his vice president. He got his chance in April at a dinner in honor of Thomas Jefferson. Calhoun and the other supporters of nullification planned to use the event to win support for their position. Jackson learned of their plans and went to dinner prepared. At the dinner, Jackson was invited to make a toast. He stood up, looked directly at John C. Calhoun, and stated bluntly, "Our federal union, it must be preserved." As Calhoun raised his glass, his hand trembled. Called on to make the next toast, Calhoun stood slowly and said, "The Union, next to our liberty, the most dear. May we all remember, the only way it can be preserved is by respecting the rights of the states and distributing equally the benefits and burdens of the Union." From that time, the two men were political enemies. South Carolina threatens to secede. Even though Jackson made it clear that he opposed the doctrine of nullification, he did not want to drive the South out of the Union. He asked Congress to reduce the tariff. and Congress did so in 1832. But Southerners thought the reduced rates were still too high. South Carolina nullified the tariff in the acts of 1828 and 1832 and voted to build its own army. South Carolina leaders threatened to secede or withdraw from the Union if the federal government tried to collect the tariffs. Jackson, enraged, told South Carolina congressmen that if the state's leaders defied the federal law, he would hang the first man he could get his hands on. Jackson ran for re-election in 1832, this time without Calhoun as his running mate. After he won, he made it clear that he would use force to see the federal laws were obeyed and the Union preserved. In the Senate, Henry Clay came to favor the compromise tariff in 1833. He hoped it would settle the issue that would prevent bloodshed. Congress quickly passed the bill, and the crisis ended. South Carolina stayed in the Union. In the next section, you will read about another issue that Jackson's presidency, his war on the bank. Thank you, and God bless America.